Hi again, everyone. Tonight's story follows two women pulled back together by chance after years apart, years shaped by a single kiss and a disappearance that refused to stay in the past. If I had recognized her voice sooner, I might have let the lamp crash to the hallway floor and spared myself 6 years of carefully maintained distance. But one kiss doesn't quietly rearrange a life. It lingers, it reshapes, it waits. "Careful," she said from behind me, low, calm, carrying that quiet amusement people use when they catch strangers struggling with something simple. The box slipped anyway. The corner dug into my arm as I turned, irritation already forming, ready to face some overly capable neighbor. Instead, I saw her, the woman who had once kissed me on a crowded balcony, the woman who had touched my jaw like I was something worth remembering, and then vanished so completely I had spent years convincing myself I imagined her. She stood 3 feet away, one hand on the elevator door. Dark hair pinned neatly, sleeves rolled, posture precise. Time had refined her, not softened her. She looked composed in the way certain cities teach you to be. Deliberate, untouchable, unapologetic. Camille. The same steady eyes, the same impossible mouth, the same way of looking at you like she could hear thoughts you hadn't spoken yet. Her expression shifted. Barely. Not surprise. Impact. "Nora," she said. No one had ever said my name like that. Like it meant something irreversible. For a second my body remembered before my pride did. Heat, pulse, recognition, all of it rising too fast. Then the walls I had built snapped back into place. "You have got to be kidding me." The elevator chimed between us. Somewhere downstairs movers cursed at a couch. The hallway smelled like dust and rain, ordinary things, grounding things. None of it mattered, all I could see was her. Even the small details I shouldn't remember were still there. The faint silver scar at her wrist, the one she'd traced absently years ago while pretending not to watch me. "I can explain the molding," she said after a pause. "Not the past, not the disappearance, just the molding." A sharp laugh escaped me. "Great, I spent years wanting an explanation. I should been more specific." Her gaze flickered, but she didn't argue. She took the box from my hands with the same quiet certainty she'd always had, like disappearing for 6 years didn't disqualify her from stepping back into my space. "You're holding it wrong," she said. Of course she said that. I stared at her. "I hate that I remember you being exactly like this." One brow lifted slightly, controlled, precise. "Apartment 4B, she said, nodding across the hall. "You're 4A. Of course she was. I had left behind everything for a reset, a draining job. A relationship that had turned into obligation, an apartment filled with memories I didn't want. I had chosen quiet, distance, something new. Instead, the past was standing across the hall, looking exactly like something I never got over. Camille carried the lamp inside without asking. The small intrusion felt more intimate than anything else she could have done. My new apartment was bare. Boxes, silence, echoes. She stood in the middle of it like she had stepped into something unfinished. "You look well," she said. I laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "That's generous. You're seeing me on moving day." It's still true, the words landed too precisely, finding the version of me I used to be, the one who stood under string lights. Breathless and unguarded, while she leaned in and changed everything. I folded my arms to keep from doing something reckless, like reaching for her just to prove she was real. "You don't get to show up after 6 years and talk to me like that." For the first time, her composure cracked. Slight but real. "I know," she said. It should have been satisfying. It wasn't seeing her pulled something loose, a memory I had buried deep enough to survive. 6 years earlier, I had been 23, standing on a rooftop in a dress I couldn't afford, pretending heartbreak hadn't left a mark. The city glittered like it was performing for us. I had joked about a sculpture looking like expensive emotional damage. She had laughed. Soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Camille leaned against the railing, dressed in black, holding a champagne glass like it belonged there. She looked like certainty in a world full of hesitation. "Do you always insult art before introductions?" she asked. "Or am I special?" I told her I saved my best insults for women who looked expensive. She studied me once, then smiled. "That sounds less like an insult and more like an invitation." The night shifted after that. We talked like we had skipped years of introductions, about work, about books people pretended to understand, about the strange pressure of becoming someone others found easy to admire. She listened like every word mattered. She noticed what I avoided. "I like old buildings," she said at one point. "They don't pretend to be untouched. Everything beautiful has been repaired at least once. By midnight, nothing else existed. Just the balcony, the lights, and the quiet certainty that she was looking at me in a way that changed things. I hadn't kissed a woman like that before. Not in any way that counted, but when she stepped closer, when her fingers brushed a loose strand of my hair and her voice softened, "Tell me if I'm mistaken." There was nothing left in me that wanted to pull away. The kiss was slow, deliberate, devastating. Like she understood exactly what she was doing, like she intended it to stay. One hand at my waist, the other at my jaw, and everything in me unraveling at once. Then her phone rang. The shift was immediate, sharp. "I'm sorry," she said, already stepping back. "I need a minute." I nodded, still unsteady, still caught somewhere between disbelief and something brighter. She touched my wrist, her gaze holding mine with an intensity that felt like a promise she couldn't keep. "Nora." Then she turned, took the call, and disappeared, down the stairwell, out of the building, out of my life, gone before the moment could settle into anything real. And now, 6 years later, she stood in my apartment like she had never left. Like the space between then and now was something that could simply be ignored. No one had a number for her that worked. Her social media was locked down, quiet, almost non-existent. Tessa's cousin didn't even remember her last name until 2 months later. And by then, I had already searched like someone one step away from becoming a cautionary tale, and found nothing. I told myself it had been one kiss, not a promise. I told myself adults survived stranger things. I told myself moving on was a decision, and then I spent years proving it wasn't that simple. Now she stood in my apartment, near a box labeled bathroom slab books, evidence that my packing system had collapsed somewhere around midnight and emotional exhaustion. I looked at her like I was deciding whether to throw something fragile or become it. "You're very quiet," she said. "You disappeared." Her jaw tightened. A short laugh slipped out. "Sorry, should I phrase it more gently? You vanished after kissing me like you meant it. That's rude, in case that's unclear. It wasn't how I intended to leave. Right. I'm sure you had a much more charming disappearing act planned." "Nora," that tone again, steady, grounding, dangerous in how easily it pulled at something I had buried. A mover appeared in the doorway, arms full of boxes, took one look at us, and retreated without a word. Camille drew in a slow breath, the kind people take when restraint has become a habit. "You should supervise your furniture," she said. I stared at her. "That's your response? It's the one least likely to make your first day here worse." "Interesting," I said. "And what exactly is this already?" Her gaze held mine. "Complicated. I should have asked her to leave. I should have shut the door, shut the past, shut everything down. Instead, I smiled, sharp, reckless, familiar. Welcome to the neighborhood, Camille. For the next 3 hours, I performed normalcy like it was a job I refused to lose. I signed paperwork with Alan, who smelled permanently like coffee, directed movers, unpacked boxes, discovered my aunt had hidden ceramic bowls inside each other like some kind of inheritance puzzle, and absolutely did not look across the hall every 30 seconds. Except I did. Around 4, her door opened. She stepped out with a canvas tote and tortoise-shell glasses I had never seen before, and immediately formed opinions about. She paused when she saw me kneeling beside a half-built bookshelf. "That shelf is upside down." I looked at the shelf, then the instructions, then back at her. "I want you to know that in any other situation, I would still find this level of confidence unbearable." One corner of her mouth shifted, not quite a smile, something sharper. "The shorter board goes across the back. I was raised by women who consider instructions optional. And how is that working?" I squinted. "Get out." She didn't. She set her tote down and walked into my apartment like it was the most natural thing in the world, crouching beside the shelf. Up close, she smelled faintly of cedar and something clean and expensive. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands steady, her movements precise. Seeing her at a party had been one kind of dangerous. Seeing her here, fixing something in my space, felt like something else entirely. "You still frown at objects like they've disappointed you," she said. I watched her profile. "You remember that?" "I remember a great deal." The air shifted. "Convenient," I said, because honesty felt like stepping onto thin ice. Her eyes lifted to mine. "It hasn't felt convenient." The words lingered, heavier than they should have been. Instead of asking what she meant, I handed her the wrong screwdriver on purpose and earned the exact look I deserved. It was easier to argue over furniture than touch whatever was waiting beneath the surface. 20 minutes later, the shelf stood upright. I thanked her with stiff politeness, like returning something sharp. She stood, wiped her hands on a towel, and scanned the apartment with quick familiarity. The windows stick when it rains. The radiator hisses the first time you turn it on. Alan forgets packages unless you ask twice. The hot water takes about 40 seconds. I folded my arms. Do you give this speech to everyone you kiss and abandon, or am I getting special treatment? She smiled then. Brief, almost painful. You were always special. The words landed clean, dangerous in how easily they could mean something. Before I could react, my phone buzzed. Tessa. 3 moving box emojis and a skull. I grabbed it like a lifeline. Tell me you survived, she said immediately. And tell me you found the mugs. I found them, I said. Still watching Camille as she picked up her tote, clearly hearing every word. Also, my new neighbor is the woman who disappeared after kissing me at your cousin's party 6 years ago. Silence. Then, I'm getting a cab. You live 40 minutes away. I can do it in 30 if the universe cooperates. Camille paused at the door, something unreadable flickering in her expression. Tessa lowered her voice. Wait, the balcony woman? Yes, the one you mentally compared everyone else to. I never said that out loud. You didn't need to. Your face handled it. I closed my eyes. Please stop speaking. Not happening. Is she still devastating? I watched Camille. Her posture, her quiet precision, the way time had somehow made her even more composed, more impossible. Time helped her. Tessa made a sound like someone witnessing disaster from a safe distance. I'm definitely coming over. Camille met my eyes one last time. Good night, Nora. Then she was gone. Her door closed softly, final in a way that echoed. Tessa arrived with Thai food, wine, and curiosity sharp enough to cut through denial. She took one look at me sitting on the floor among unopened boxes and sighed. That is the face of someone who either committed a crime or fell for her past again. Neither. Both. So I told her everything. The hallway, the lamp, the apartment, the bookshelf, the infuriating composure. Tessa listened, occasionally muttering commentary, until she finally said, You're talking about her like your body still remembers her. That hit too close to ignore. You don't owe her anything, she added, opening the wine. This is exactly the kind of situation people make terrible decisions in. I'm not doing anything. Of course not, she said, pouring a second glass. And I'm drinking responsibly. I threw a pillow at her. She caught it easily. All I'm saying, she continued, is that you spent years talking about a woman whose last name you barely knew, but whose kiss apparently rewired your standards. That doesn't disappear. I was over it, I said, until she showed up again. Convenient, Tessa said, for chaos. By midnight the wine was gone, the boxes blurred, and Tessa had fallen asleep on my bed. I stood barefoot by the window, watching rain gloss the street below. Across the hall, a thin strip of light glowed under Camille's door. I told myself not to notice. At 1 a.m, I brushed my teeth with my finger because I still hadn't unpacked. At 1:15, I changed into an old t-shirt and lay down in a room that still didn't feel like mine, while the past sat just across the hall, awake, at 1:22. Soft movement echoed in the hallway, followed by the quiet click of a door. By 1:25, the effort to ignore it collapsed. I crossed the room and looked through the peephole. Camille stood outside her apartment in a charcoal coat, her hair loose over one shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, indistinct, impossible to catch. But then she smiled. Not wide, not careless. Just enough to break the precision of her face. The sight hit somewhere unreasonably deep. Maybe it was work. Maybe a friend. Maybe someone closer. She wasn't mine. She had never been. The fact that something in me reacted anyway was humiliating. I stepped back too quickly, nearly tripping over a box of books. That first week in the building became a slow, relentless series of almost encounters. Intimacy engineered by narrow hallways and bad timing. The landing outside our doors forced proximity. Passing meant brushing shoulders unless one of us pressed flat to the wall. The elevator lingered just long enough to turn silence into tension. The laundry room bred small inconveniences. The front gate stuck in the rain. The roof offered a view too good to refuse. And Camille was everywhere, early mornings leaving with damp hair and a travel mug. Evenings carrying neatly tied folders. Once in the lobby, patiently helping the elderly woman from 2C navigate a delivery app with a kindness that irritated me for reasons I didn't want to examine. Twice on the roof, where the city lights turned her into something cinematic and unfair, she noticed just as much. On my 4th morning, she caught me heading out for coffee in wrinkled sweatpants. You left your umbrella in the kitchen yesterday. I stopped mid-step. How would you know where in my apartment I left my umbrella? You came home with takeout. Opened your door with your hip, and said, "I'm not walking back to the kitchen for you. That sounds like eavesdropping. That sounds like thin walls." You remembered the sentence. You said it with conviction. Later that day, I found a package from a stationery store sitting neatly outside my door, dry despite the rain. No note, no explanation. Alan hadn't brought it up. Alan treated packages like philosophical dilemmas. When I knocked on Camille's door, she opened it in reading glasses and socks, took one look at the box and said, "You're welcome. You can't just do something nice in a way that annoys me." Why not? Because it complicates things. She studied me for a moment. The balance isn't in my favor. "No," I said quietly, "it isn't." The truth settled between us, heavy and unresolved. A few days later, out of boredom and questionable judgment, I agreed to drinks with a woman named Priya. She had an easy smile, the kind of life that seemed organized, intentional. The date was good, genuinely good. Conversation flowed. She laughed at my jokes before I finished them, which felt dangerously flattering. I came home just after 10, carrying the soft warmth of gin and the unfamiliar ease of having enjoyed myself without forcing it. Camille was kneeling by her door, struggling with a stubborn lock. She looked up at the sound of the elevator. Her gaze flicked briefly to the faint lipstick near my mouth, and something in her expression stilled. "Good date?" she asked. Her voice was steady. Her grip on the doorknob wasn't. I could have deflected. I could have lied. Instead, something sharper took over. "Yes," a beat passed. "I'm glad," she said. The words might have worked if the key ring in her hand hadn't snapped cleanly in half. Not the key. The ring, a sharp metallic break in the quiet hallway. We both stared at it. She exhaled slowly, controlled, like she'd just been betrayed by something small and fundamental. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Strong reaction to hardware. "It was already weak," she said. "Interesting timing, Nora." I stepped closer, emboldened by a mix of pettiness and the lingering warmth of the evening. Should I ignore the possibility that my dating life seems to trigger structural failures around you? Something flickered across her face, quick, almost alarmed. "You think I would interfere?" "I think you looked one breath away from setting something on fire." Instead of deflecting, she went quiet. Completely still, a door clicked somewhere down the hall. The woman from 2C appeared with her tiny dog, took one look at us, and retreated immediately. Camille held the broken ring in her palm. "Did she kiss you?" The question landed without warning. Bare, unguarded, I crossed my arms, grounding myself. "You don't get to ask that." Her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. "No," she said, softer now, "I don't." I went inside before I could answer. Desire, especially the kind that never resolved, had a way of coexisting perfectly with resentment. They fed each other, sharpened each other. Every time Camille noticed something. My haircut, the way I favored one wrist when I typed too long, the nights I paced when sleep wouldn't come. I felt the same split reaction. "How dare you notice?" "Thank you for noticing." The following Friday, a storm rolled in just after sunset. Rain slammed against the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. The apartment fell into damp, heavy darkness. I found my phone, 6% battery. Of course, doors opened in the hallway. Someone downstairs shouted at the weather like it had personally offended them. When I stepped outside with my phone's weak flashlight, Camille was already there. With an actual flashlight. Of course she was. "The outage usually doesn't last long," she said. "Do you also have candles, or should I pace my admiration?" "Kitchen drawer. Left side." She angled the light toward my door, then paused. "If your freezer opens, it'll start leaking." I looked at her. "I know this is irrational, but your competence feels targeted." A faint sound escaped her, almost a laugh. "Come to my apartment." It didn't sound casual, it sounded inevitable. "The windows seal better," she added, "and I have tea." The dark behind me felt too quiet, too small, too full of thoughts I didn't want to sit with. "Tea," I repeated, skeptical. "And battery packs." I exhaled. "That's unfairly persuasive." Her apartment smelled like bergamot, clean linen, and rain against brick. It felt nothing like mine. Her apartment felt settled in a way mine didn't. Warm where mine was temporary. Deliberate where mine was still a collection of unpacked intentions. Books filled the shelves in thoughtful stacks. A bowl of lemons rested on the counter, and an architectural sketch hung above the sofa with quiet confidence. Camille handed me a mug and set a lantern on the table. Amber light softened everything except the tension between us. "I didn't know you drank tea," I said, reaching for something neutral. "I don't much," she replied. "But I remembered you did." I looked up sharply. "One conversation?" "Two," she corrected. The balcony, and later by the bar when the olives went everywhere. You remember the olives? You said you could judge a party by whether the martinis survived. You were right. Something in my chest tightened. Embarrassingly sincere. Camille, her name came out like both warning and plea. Rain pressed harder against the windows. A car alarm started somewhere outside, distant and futile. Camille watched me over the rim of her mug, and for the first time her composure looked deliberate rather than effortless. You should know, she said quietly. I haven't forgotten anything important about that night. The words landed with force. Then why did you leave? She lowered the mug slowly, her gaze steady. Because I had to. That's what people say when they don't want to explain. I know. No, I don't think you do. The frustration rose too fast to stop. Do you know what it's like to spend years thinking something mattered, only to feel ridiculous for it later? To be remembered by a moment instead of a choice, she set her mug down. Nora, if you say my name like that again without answering, I'm leaving. Something flickered across her face, brief, almost desperate. There was an emergency, she said finally. My sister. The room stilled. I got a call. I went to the hospital. By morning, everything had changed. It was the first real peace she had offered. What happened? Her gaze dropped. Not tonight. Anger steadied me. That's not enough. It's what I can give. I set my mug down harder than necessary. Then here's what I can give. If you wanted me, you should have stayed. The words hung between us, sharp and irreversible. Camille closed her eyes for a brief moment, like something in her had been struck clean through. When she opened them again, her voice was barely there. I know. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing too close to something neither of us knew how to fix. 15 minutes later, the power returned with a low hum through the building. I left with my phone charged and my emotions anything but. That night stretched long and restless. The radiator hissed and sleep stayed out of reach. The difference between not wanting someone and not believing you were allowed to have them settled heavily in my thoughts. Her expression when I said you should have stayed hadn't been defensive. It had looked undone. Days passed, and the building continued its quiet refusal to respect boundaries. 3 mornings later, I found her in the basement laundry room, sitting with a newspaper spread neatly in her hands, while dryers thumped behind her. You own a newspaper. Good morning, Nora. That's not an answer. I also own socks. There's a lot you don't know. Your existence as a functional adult is starting to feel personal. A faint smile touched her mouth. You came down here ready to argue. My sheets smell like stress, I said, lifting my laundry basket. The argument is incidental. She nodded toward an empty washer. That one leaks if you overfill it. Is there anything in this building you're not familiar with? You? The answer came too easily, landing somewhere deeper than expected. I looked away first. While I loaded detergent, I could feel her attention in brief, quiet passes. Not intrusive, just aware. It was somehow more intimate than staring. When I rolled my sleeves up, her gaze flicked once to the pale burn mark on my arm. You still cook when you're upset. I blinked. Excuse me? You got that after the party. You posted a photo of a ruined grilled cheese. I turned slowly. You checked my social media, a pause. Then, perfectly serious. That sounds worse when you say it like that. It should have unsettled me. Instead, something warmer, more dangerous, settled in. You kept up with me for 6 years? Not continuously. That's supposed to help? She set the paper aside. I checked sometimes. Why? Her gaze held mine. Because not talking to you didn't stop me from wanting to know you were okay. For a moment, breathing felt optional. Then the dryer buzzed, breaking the moment cleanly. She stood and began folding clothes with precise, efficient movements. I watched her hands longer than necessary, aware of how little it took to remind me I wasn't over her. That night, I told Tessa everything. She basically watched your life from a distance because she couldn't let go, Tessa said, nearly dropping her food. That's either deeply romantic or mildly alarming. I hate that both options feel true, and she broke a key ring because you had lipstick on. It wasn't intentional. It was emotional, Tessa corrected. And obvious. I pushed my food around the plate. It's complicated. The official slogan of your love life. Am I supposed to ask her what actually happened? She gave you a fragment, Tessa said. Maybe stop giving her full access until she earns it. That sounded reasonable. It lasted 4 days. On Thursday night, I came home from a long call to find Camille sitting on the floor outside my apartment, a small box in her lap. I stopped short. Why are you sitting here like a well-dressed raccoon? She looked up, her hair falling across her face in a way that made the insult feel softer than intended. Your package was downstairs. It seemed fragile. You could left it at the door. I wasn't sure if it would break. I took the box. What is it? Mugs, she said after glancing at the label. Heat crept into my face. Don't analyze that. I wasn't planning to. You were. I can infer things. She stood smoothly, stepping aside as I unlocked my door. I'll be out tomorrow evening, she said casually. I glanced back. Is that information or strategy? In case you wanted privacy. I laughed. That's the most controlled way anyone has ever asked about my plans. A faint flush appeared, then disappeared. I'm not asking. If you were any more obvious, I'd need warning signs. She said nothing, which said everything. I leaned against the door frame, letting recklessness take over. I do have a date tomorrow. The silence sharpened instantly. With the museum woman, she asked. Different one. You remembered her job, I pointed out. Her expression shifted, subtle, but not enough to hide. Good night, Nora. She turned, already halfway to her door. You don't want me dating anyone else. She stopped. The hallway seemed to narrow around us as she turned back slowly, one hand still resting on the doorknob. That isn't a fair question, she said quietly. Not if you expect an answer I'm allowed to give. Allowed the word caught. Not able. Not willing. Allowed. Something in me sharpened instantly. Allowed by who? Her gaze slipped away for the first time since I had moved in. Good night. She went inside, leaving me alone in the hallway with a box of mugs and a pulse that refused to settle. The next evening, I went out with Maya Santos, a pediatric physical therapist with dimples, blunt bangs, and the kind of presence that made every bartender within 10 feet suddenly more attentive. She was easy to like, funny without trying, direct in a way that made you feel seen and slightly exposed. Dinner was effortless. We argued playfully about terrible movies, shared small confessions, let the night unfold without resistance. You look like someone who reads instructions after things go wrong, she said at one point. Accurate and deeply offensive, I replied. When she kissed me outside the restaurant, it was good. Warm, steady, uncomplicated, and still. The first thing that surfaced in my mind wasn't her. It was Camille's voice in the hallway. Did she kiss you? I nearly laughed at myself in frustration. That bad? Maya asked softly. No, I said quickly. Sorry. That was unrelated internal chaos. I like those, she said. And I liked her. That was the problem. When we reached my building, rain had started again, soft and silver. Maya walked me to the elevator, close enough to feel intentional. On the 4th floor, the doors opened, and Camille stepped out at the exact same moment. She took in everything in a single glance. Me, Maya, the distance between us that wasn't really distance. Evening, Maya said easily. Camille's attention lingered on me for just a fraction too long before shifting. Good evening. Jealousy, when controlled that well, became something sharper. More dangerous. Maya, perceptive and entirely unafraid, leaned in and kissed my cheek. Text me. I will. The elevator doors closed behind her. Camille stayed where she was, one hand on her doorframe, expression perfectly composed, except for the tension in her knuckles. What? I asked. You're wet. I glanced at my damp jacket and laughed. Insightful. You should change before you get cold. That sounded like concern and judgment at the same time. Nora. What? Her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. Nothing. I went inside quickly, before the moment could stretch into something worse. An hour later, I was in sweatpants, half out of my makeup, trying to make sense of wanting two incompatible things at once when a soft knock came at the door. Camille stood there holding a folded towel and an old-fashioned hot water bottle, like she belonged to a gentler era entirely. You forgot these in the dryer. I looked at the towel, then at her. You came over because of laundry, and because you're cold. I hadn't noticed until she said it. You're impossible. Her eyes moved over me. Bare legs, oversized shirt, damp hair. The look wasn't careless. It was controlled, restrained, and somehow more intense because of it. I know, she said. The air in the room shifted. I took the towel. Our fingers brushed, brief, clean and electric enough to make me curse under my breath. She closed her hand slowly, as if stopping herself from reaching again. Good night, Nora. Camille. She paused. I tightened my grip on the towel. Did you stay in your apartment tonight just to see when I came home? The question came out sharper than intended. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. Just the truth. My chest tightened around it. Why? She held my gaze. Because I wanted to know if you came home smiling. Whatever expression crossed my face changed hers in return. For a moment, her composure faltered. just enough to reveal something raw beneath it. The possibility of her stepping closer hovered between us. Then her phone buzzed. She stepped back immediately, as if the sound itself restored distance. Good night. The door closed before I could decide whether to stop her. By Monday, 2 things were certain. Maya was steady, warm, uncomplicated. Camille was none of those things, and impossible to ignore. It unfolded in small, undeniable ways. A flickering bulb outside my door replaced without comment. Migraine tablets left on my mat after a night she must have overheard. Care that showed up quietly and refused acknowledgement. And beneath all of it, jealousy. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. Which made it worse. That was how she ended up in my apartment again. Just past midnight, after I nearly collapsed in the kitchen. It started with work and stubbornness, the kind that convinces you coffee counts as a meal. By 10, a fever had settled in. By 11, I was standing at the sink, dizzy enough to knock a glass onto the floor. It shattered. A second later, a knock. Nora. I looked at the broken glass at my bare feet, at the room tilting slightly. This is humiliating, I said. The door opened before I remembered I hadn't locked it properly. Camille took in everything at once. Me, the mess, the risk, and crossed the room with controlled urgency that bypassed pride entirely. Sit, I'm fine. You're swaying. That's a stylistic choice. I sat anyway. She cleaned the glass first, efficient and precise. Then she crouched in front of me and pressed the back of her hand to my forehead. The touch was gentle enough to undo me. You're burning up. I hate when people are right and attractive. Thank you for your bravery. I laughed, then coughed. She moved through the apartment like she knew it, finding the kettle, the tea, even the forgotten soup in the freezer, watching someone take care of you that easily felt dangerous. Like a future being suggested without permission. You don't have to stay, I said from the couch as she wrapped a blanket around me. I know, that wasn't reassurance. That was a real option. I know that too. You're very annoying when I'm like this. Only then did she meet my eyes. The soft lamplight gentled her face in a way daylight never quite managed. I'm worse when I'm frightened, my breath caught. Are you? Yes. The honesty tightened the room. Of what? A pause. That you'll try to stand up again. I stared at her for one offended second, then laughed hard enough to wheeze. She smiled despite herself, and the sight of it hit like something rare and unguarded. Camille not composed, not careful. Just happy. She stayed. She stayed through the fever climbing after midnight, through my half-delirious rambling about terrible work copy and how cough syrup tasted like regret. She stayed when the chills set in, when the blanket slipped, and she tucked it back with quiet precision. And when the medication softened everything enough for honesty, I asked, voice heavy with exhaustion, "Did you ever think about me?" She went still in the armchair, sleeves rolled, posture composed like she'd scheduled herself to witness this moment. Yes. How much? A pause, then quieter than anything she'd said before. Too often for someone trying to be good. I should have let that sit. Instead, fever loosened my restraint. That sounds self-righteous. Pain crossed her face, real, unpolished. You're right, she said. It was selfish. I called it restraint because that sounded better than fear. The room blurred at the edges. Fear of what? Losing more than I could bear. It was an answer, but not enough. I shifted under the blanket and immediately regretted it when the room tilted. Camille crossed to me, steadying my shoulder. Easy. I looked up at her from too close. She looked down like someone handling something fragile and dangerous at once. Why do you keep taking care of me? Her expression shifted, just enough to show the cost of answering. Because every time I've tried to step back from you, my body hasn't agreed. The fever blurred judgment. So did the way her hand lingered, the years between us suddenly collapsing into something immediate. Before I could reconsider, I reached up and brushed my fingers along her jaw. She inhaled sharply. It was nothing. Just a touch. But it changed everything. Her eyes closed for a brief second, and when they opened, the restraint there looked painful. Nora, she said softly, voice frayed, you're sick, I'm aware. If you kiss me right now, you'll blame the fever tomorrow. That assumes a lot. A faint, helpless laugh escaped her. It assumes I'm trying to survive this. I should have been grateful for her restraint. Instead, I wanted to undo it. Sleeps came eventually, sometime after 2, with her hand loosely resting over mine, and the television playing muted subtitles neither of us watched. At dawn, the blanket was tucked more carefully around me, and Camille had fallen asleep in the armchair, one hand still within reach, like proximity itself had been her compromise. No one had ever looked more dangerous to my peace while sleeping. The next 2 days blurred into fever and recovery. Tea, medicine, unfinished emails, and the surreal reality of being cared for by the person I had spent years trying to forget. Camille filled my kitchen with broth and citrus, insisted on rest with quiet authority, and once stood in my bathroom reading medicine instructions like she was preparing testimony. "There are easier ways to make someone emotionally dependent," I said hoarsely. That sounds like a complaint from someone who's finished exactly 1 bowl of soup, 1.5. You abandoned 3 spoonfuls. You counted? Yes. The answer lingered longer than it should have. By the 3rd evening, the fever had broken, and enough vanity returned for me to care about looking human again. I found her at the sink, rinsing a mug. "You can go home." She turned off the tap. "Do you want me to?" "No." Something in her expression softened, just slightly. She stayed. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a documentary playing to no one, the silence steady but charged. At some point, my head tipped onto her shoulder. She went completely still. I should have moved, I didn't. I stayed there, aware of the warmth of her, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the unexpected comfort of simply being allowed. After a moment, she leaned her cheek gently against my hair. It was more intimate than a kiss. When I finally pulled away, neither of us pretended it hadn't happened. "Thank you," I said quietly. For what? There were 100 answers. I chose the one that mattered, for not making me feel alone. Her composure broke, visibly this time. She set the mug down. "I need you to understand something," she said. "If I start being honest, I may not know how to stop. Then don't ration the truth." Silence stretched between us. "My sister died 2 days after that party." The words emptied the room. I stared at her. "The call that night was from the hospital. She overdosed. They brought her back once." She swallowed. "She had a daughter, Lucy, 12 years old. No father. Everything after that became hospitals, lawyers, social workers, and a child asking if I was leaving too." The air left my chest. "I kept thinking I would find you when things settled," she said. "But they didn't. My sister died. Her parents fought custody. I had to move, build a case for stability. My life turned into evidence." Her voice held steady, but her hands told the truth. "I thought about you constantly. At first because I wanted to, then because I couldn't stop. But every version of reaching out felt like dragging you into something broken. You were just starting your life. I had court dates and grief and a house full of panic. The anger I had carried didn't disappear, but it shifted. Then I saw you with someone," she continued. "Alexis. Yes, you looked happy. We hadn't even started dating until a year later. I convinced myself you'd moved on, and by then it felt too late. Any message would have been for me, not for you." "Did you try?" Her jaw tightened. 3 times. I wrote messages I never sent. I almost asked for your number once and stopped. Another time, I went somewhere hoping you'd be there. You were. You were laughing. I left. The thought of it, of missing each other like that, twisted something deep. "You don't get points for suffering quietly," I said. "I know. You still made the choice for me. I know that too." I looked away before the emotion could break through. Rain tapped softly against the window. The city hummed like nothing had changed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She hesitated, and the answer showed in her face before she spoke. "Because when I saw you again, I wanted one selfish week before becoming the person who hurt you." A sharp laugh escaped me. "That's a terrible answer." "I know. Stop saying that." A faint breath left her. "What would you prefer? That you admit you were arrogant, and scared, and wrong?" A flicker of something almost like humor crossed her expression. "All of the above." It steadied me just enough to speak clearly. "I'm sorry about your sister and Lucy, and everything you went through." "That matters." I met her eyes, "but it doesn't erase what it did to me. It should not have mattered in the way it did." But Camille said immediately that she was not asking for forgiveness or for anything to be rewritten into something easier. She was only stating what she could and could not give, and even that distinction carried weight. Something in me sharpened at the idea of permission being involved at all. I asked who was granting her such limits, and for the first time since she had moved in across from me, her gaze slid away. She ended it simply by saying goodnight and leaving me alone with a box of mugs and too much adrenaline to make sense of. The following evening I went out with Maya Santos, a pediatric physical therapist, whose warmth made every room feel more manageable. She was easy in the way some people are, as if kindness was not a performance but a habit. We ate tapas, talked through bad movies, and laughed in a way that required no effort to maintain. She noticed the way I hesitated sometimes, as if part of me was elsewhere, and she understood without needing it explained. When she kissed me outside the restaurant, it was good in a clean, uncomplicated way. And still, my mind betrayed me by bringing up Camille's voice from the hallway instead of staying present in the moment. I disliked how quickly memory could interrupt reality. Later that night, in the lobby of my building, Maya brushed rain from my sleeve and said she would like to see me again. I agreed, though something in me already knew the answer was more complicated than that. When I stepped inside, Camille was there by the mailboxes, holding a folder and her keys as if she had been waiting without admitting it. Her expression did not break when she saw me returning with someone else's warmth still on my skin. It tightened instead, controlled and precise, which somehow made it worse. The elevator ride was silent. On the 4th-floor landing, I moved toward my door and she spoke first, asking about Maya in a tone that stayed carefully neutral. I told her to stop speaking in fragments, stop observing without acknowledging, and stop acting as though she could remain distant while remaining present in every detail of my life. Her answer came without hesitation. She said she wanted me, not as an idea, not as memory, but as I was. Then she stepped closer and said she was in love with me in a way that had nothing abstract about it. It was direct, unadorned, and unprotected. I told her it could not be that simple. She answered that she was not simplifying anything, only refusing to lie. The air between us shifted into something that no longer belonged to either of us alone. When I finally let myself respond, I did not do it carefully. I told her that if this was going to happen, it could not repeat the patterns of disappearance, silence, or restraint that had defined everything before. She agreed to all of it without hesitation. No vanishing, no guessing, no silent punishment disguised as control. The tension between us broke into something almost unbearable in its clarity. I stepped closer and asked for one more condition, not of distance or rules, but of honesty. She understood immediately, then she asked to kiss me. The answer did not come from thought. It came from everything that had been building for years without permission to resolve. I pulled her in and kissed her, and it was nothing like the first time. That one had been collision and shock. This one was recognition. It carried everything we had lost and everything we had not yet dared to name. When we finally moved inside my apartment, nothing about it felt accidental anymore. Not the way she stood just inside the door, not the way I crossed the room and took her face in my hands, not the way she asked for certainty before allowing herself to fall into it. She stayed that night. Then the next. The shape of our days shifted quietly, without announcement, into something shared. Mornings became softer, nights became less uncertain. She learned the small details of my habits, and I learned the careful weight of her attention. There was still fear between us, but it no longer controlled everything. One morning she told me she had loved me for a long time in a way that had been both devotion and damage. I told her that love required more than survival, that it required showing up fully, not from the edges of absence. She agreed, even when it hurt to do so. When I woke beside her for the first time with no distance between us and no disappearance waiting at the edges of the room, I understood something simple and irreversible. Wanting her had once felt like reaching toward loss. Now it felt like being met halfway and held there. Outside, the city continued, as it always had, indifferent and loud. Inside, there was no longer any argument between memory and presence. There was only the quiet certainty of staying.